courtroom doors didn't just open. They groaned under the weight of the silence in the room. Everyone expected a fight, but no one expected her. When Amelia walked in, she didn't look like the wife of the city's wealthiest real estate mogul. She looked shattered. She wore a coat 3 sizes too big. Her hair was a mess, and in her arms she balanced 2 sleeping toddlers. The mistress, sitting in the front row, laughed out loud. But that laugh was the last mistake she would ever make, because inside that diaper bag wasn't just baby bottles. It was a recording that would burn their entire world to the ground. The champagne flute shattered against the marble fireplace, the sound echoing through the penthouse like a gunshot. "Oops," Bianca giggled, though her eyes shimmered with zero regret. She lounged on the velvet sofa, her red dress hiked up her thighs, looking every bit the queen of the castle she hadn't paid for. "I suppose we can afford 1,000 more, can't we, baby?" Caleb Montgomery stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling skyline of Seattle. He took a sip of his scotch, a smirk playing on his lips. "We can afford the factory that makes them, Bianca. Don't worry about a glass." He turned to look at her. Bianca Rossi was everything his wife wasn't. She was loud, demanding, flashy, and obsessed with status. And right now, she was the trophy he wanted to display. Caleb was 42, fit and ruthlessly successful. He had built Montgomery Holdings from a small loan into an empire. But his greatest trick wasn't in the boardroom. It was the magic act he was pulling on his wife, Amelia. "Tomorrow is the big day," Bianca purred, stretching her arms like a cat. "The final hearing. Are you sure she's not going to get anything? I don't want that frumpy cow taking half of my future shopping budget." Caleb laughed, a dark, throaty sound. "Amelia, fight back, please. You know her. She's pathologically shy. She thinks the sun rises and sets on being a good mother. I've spent the last 6 months moving assets into offshore shell companies in the Caymans and buying art under your brother's name. On paper, Montgomery Holdings is bleeding money. By the time Judge Thornton looks at the books tomorrow, I'll look like a man on the brink of bankruptcy." Bianca clapped her hands, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "You're evil, I love it. And the twins?" Caleb's face hardened slightly. "They're 2 years old. They won't remember the divorce. I'll pay the state minimum for child support. Amelia can move back to that dusty little town in Oregon she came from. I'm done playing house with a woman who wears sweatpants to dinner." It was a cruel assessment of a 10-year marriage. Amelia had been with Caleb when he was nothing. She had proofread his business plans, cooked his meals when they couldn't afford takeout, and nursed him through the stress-induced ulcers of his 30s. But gratitude was a currency Caleb didn't trade in. He traded in upgrades, and in his mind, Bianca was the latest model. "I heard she's been staying at a Motel 6 since you kicked her out," Bianca said, picking up a grape and popping it into her mouth. "That's just sad. Do you think she'll even show up?" "She has to," Caleb sneered, checking his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his silk tie. "If she doesn't, I get a default judgment." "I almost hope she doesn't. It would save me the hour of pretending to look sad." The intercom buzzed. It was the concierge. "Mr. Montgomery, your lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, is here." "Send him up." A moment later, Arthur Abernathy walked in. He was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a man who charged $1,000 an hour to destroy lives legally. He didn't look happy. "We have a problem," Abernathy said, skipping the pleasantries. Caleb frowned. "What problem?" "The assets are hidden. The prenup is ironclad." "It's Amelia," Abernathy said, placing a briefcase on the table. "My paralegal spotted her today. She was at the library." Bianca burst out laughing. "The library? What is she doing? Checking out Divorce for Dummies? Abernathy didn't smile. She was in the public records section. And she wasn't alone. She was talking to an old man, looked like a vagrant, but she was handing him papers. Caleb waved his hand dismissively. Amelia volunteers at soup kitchens, Arthur. She's probably helping some homeless guy apply for food stamps. That's just who she is. Weak. Soft. I don't like surprises, Caleb, the lawyer warned. Judge Thornton is presiding tomorrow. He's old school. He hates liars and he has a soft spot for mothers. If Amelia plays the victim card correctly. She doesn't know how to play cards, Caleb interrupted, pouring another drink. She thinks the legal system is fair. She thinks if she tells the truth, she'll be protected. She has no idea I've bought the game. Relax, Arthur. Tomorrow, I walk out a single man, and Bianca becomes the new Mrs. Montgomery. Bianca squealed and jumped into Caleb's arms. They kissed, celebrating their victory before the battle had even begun. They had no idea that across town, in a small, damp motel room, Amelia wasn't sleeping. She was ironing a shirt she had bought at Goodwill, and she wasn't crying. She was waiting. The sprawling, majestic courthouse in downtown Seattle was designed to intimidate. Massive stone pillars, echoing hallways, and the smell of old wood and fear. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was stifling. Caleb sat at the defense table, looking immaculate in a charcoal bespoke suit. He checked his Rolex every 30 seconds, tapping his pen against the mahogany table. Beside him, Arthur Abernathy arranged his files with surgical precision. In the gallery behind them sat Bianca. She hadn't been subtle. She wore a white dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown, cut short, with a massive sun hat that was entirely inappropriate for court. She was whispering loudly to her friend, giggling and pointing at the empty plaintiff's table. 10 minutes late, Caleb muttered. She's not coming. Give it time, Abernathy whispered. The judge hasn't entered yet. Just then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the room creaked open. The chatter in the gallery died down. Heads turned. Caleb swiveled in his chair, a mocking smile ready on his lips. But the smile faltered, just for a second. Amelia Montgomery walked in. She looked terrible. But it was a specific kind of terrible. It wasn't the messiness of a lazy person. It was the exhaustion of a soldier. She wore a faded grey coat that hung loosely on her frame. Her shoes were scuffed flat boots. Her blonde hair, usually kept in a neat bun, was pulled back in a fraying elastic, strands falling into her face. But it was what she was carrying that sucked the air out of the room. On her left hip sat Leo, and on her right sat Sophie. The twins. They were 2 years old, with Caleb's dark eyes and Amelia's soft chin. They were dressed in clean but mismatched clothes. Leo was clutching a plastic dinosaur, and Sophie had her thumb in her mouth, looking around the massive room with wide, terrified eyes. Amelia didn't have a nanny. She didn't have an entourage. She didn't even have a lawyer. She walked down the center aisle, the sound of her boots heavy on the floor. She struggled under the weight of the 2 toddlers, her breath coming in short, audible rasps. "Oh my God," Bianca whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. "She brought the brats? Is this a daycare?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "What is she doing?" he hissed to Abernathy. "Why is she carrying them?" "Sympathy," Abernathy noted, his eyes narrowing. "She's painting a picture, Caleb, the abandoned mother." Amelia reached the plaintiff's table. She didn't look at Caleb. She didn't look at the gallery. She gently set Leo down on the chair. Then Sophie. She pulled 2 juice boxes from a worn canvas bag and handed them to the children. Then she stood up, smoothing her coat, and stood alone. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison Thornton entered. He was a man in his 60s, with a face carved from granite and eyebrows that looked like thunderclouds. He took his seat, his eyes scanning the room over his reading glasses. He looked at the polished, expensive team on the right, Caleb and Abernathy. Then he looked at the left, Amelia, standing alone, flanked by 2 toddlers sucking on juice boxes. Case number 4920, Montgomery versus Montgomery, the clerk announced. Appearances, Judge Thornton rumbled. Arthur Abernathy for the respondent. Caleb Montgomery, Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice smooth as silk. The judge turned his gaze to Amelia. And for the petitioner, Amelia cleared her throat. Her voice was quiet, trembling slightly. I am representing myself, Your Honor. I couldn't afford counsel. Bianca snorted from the back row. The judge's eyes snapped up to the gallery instantly. If I hear one more sound from the gallery, I will have it cleared. Is that understood? Silence fell. Bianca slouched, crossing her arms. Mrs. Montgomery, Judge Thornton said, his voice softening just a fraction. You have children in the courtroom. This is highly irregular. Usually we prefer children not to be present for divorce proceedings. I know, Your Honor, Amelia said, looking down at her hands. I'm sorry, I didn't have a choice. The daycare requires payment in advance, and my card was declined this morning. I have no family in the city. I couldn't leave them alone. Caleb rolled his eyes. It was a performance. It had to be. He had left her with $5,000 in the joint account. Surely she hadn't burned through that in 3 weeks. Very well, the judge sighed. Let's proceed. Mr. Abernathy, you filed a motion to dismiss spousal support based on the prenuptial agreement. We did, Your Honor. Abernathy stood up, buttoning his jacket. My client, Mr. Montgomery, has been generous. However, the business is currently facing significant headwinds. We have provided financial statements showing that Mr. Montgomery's liquid assets are negligible. He is barely keeping the company afloat. Asking for the original alimony amount would bankrupt him. Abernathy walked to the bench and handed over a thick binder. These are the audited financials. The judge flipped through them. These show a net loss for the last 3 quarters. Exactly, Caleb spoke up, unable to help himself. He put on his best stressed businessman face. Your Honor, I've tried. The market has shifted. I want to support my children, of course, but I cannot give what I do not have. Amelia stood there, silent. She looked small, defeated. Mrs. Montgomery, the judge said, looking at her over the binder. Do you have a response to these financial claims? Amelia reached into a canvas bag. She didn't pull out a binder. She pulled out a single, crumpled receipt and a USB drive. I don't know much about businesses, Your Honor, Amelia said softly. Caleb always told me I was too simple to understand his work. But I do know that last week my husband bought a yacht. The room went dead silent. Caleb froze. Objection! Abernathy shouted. Hearsay! There is no record of a yacht purchase in these documents. I have the receipt, Amelia said, holding up the crumpled paper. I found it in the pocket of his pants before he threw them out. He bought it under the name C. Wolf, LLC. And I have pictures. She placed the USB drive on the table. Caleb's face turned a shade of pale that didn't match his tan. He leaned toward Abernathy. I thought you said you shredded everything. I did, Abernathy hissed. Where did she get that? Judge Thornton looked at the USB drive, then at Caleb. Mr. Abernathy, if your client is pleading poverty while purchasing luxury marine vessels, this hearing is going to take a very different turn. It's a misunderstanding, Your Honor, Abernathy stammered. That LLC belongs to a business partner. Actually, Amelia interrupted, her voice gaining a strange, steel-like strength. "The LLC is registered to Bianca Rossi." She turned slowly, for the first time, to look at the mistress in the back row. Bianca's mouth dropped open. "And," Amelia continued, "since Miss Rossi has no declared income for the last 5 years, I was wondering how she afforded a $3 million boat." The twist wasn't just that Amelia knew. The twist was that she had done her homework. Judge Thornton's gavel hovered in the air, not striking, just waiting. The tension in the room was so thick you could choke on it. "Miss Rossi?" The judge's voice boomed toward the gallery. "Please, stand up." Bianca, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck, slowly stood up. Her white dress suddenly looked very ridiculous. I don't know what she's talking about." "Approach the bench," the judge ordered. He wasn't asking. Bianca wobbled on her heels as she walked through the gate, standing next to Caleb. Caleb wouldn't look at her. He was staring at Amelia, trying to figure out when his wife had replaced her brain with a supercomputer. "Mrs. Montgomery alleges that you are the owner of a shell company used to hide marital assets," Judge Thornton said, his eyes drilling into Bianca. "Is this true?" "No," Bianca squeaked. "I mean, Caleb handles my finances. I just sign things." A ripple of laughter went through the few people in the back of the court. Caleb closed his eyes. She had just admitted it. "So you admit you signed documents for Seawolf LLC?" the judge asked. I don't remember," Bianca backpedaled, looking at Caleb for help. Caleb remained statue still. Amelia spoke up again. She picked up Leo, who had started to whimper. She bounced him gently on her hip, looking like the picture of maternal grace amidst the chaos. "Your Honor," Amelia said, "if I may. I also have bank statements. It seems that while our children's health insurance was cancelled last month for non-payment..." She paused, letting that sink in. Mr. Montgomery transferred $200,000 to a consulting firm called Vance and Associates. She pulled another piece of paper from her bag. "Who is Vance?" the judge asked, his brow furrowing. "Vance is Miss Rossi's maiden name," Amelia said calmly, "and the registered address for the company is the same address as her mother's house in Florida." Caleb slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! This is an ambush." "Sit down, Mr. Montgomery," Judge Thornton roared. The gavel finally came down with a crack that made the twins jump. "You are treading on very thin ice. You come into my courtroom claiming poverty, while your wife, who is carrying your children, presents evidence of massive fraud." "It's not fraud," Caleb argued, his face turning red. "It's estate planning." "It's theft," the judge corrected. "Theft from the marital estate." Mr. Abernathy stood up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Your Honor, clearly we need a recess to review this new evidence. We were not made aware of these documents." "Request denied," Thornton said coldly. "You don't get a recess because you got caught. We are proceeding." The judge turned his attention back to Amelia. "Mrs. Montgomery, you have proven that there are hidden assets. But the respondent is arguing that the twins..." He paused, looking at the paperwork. "Mr. Montgomery has filed a motion questioning the paternity of the children to void the trust fund clause in your prenup." The room gasped. This was the low blow everyone knew was coming, but hearing it out loud was sickening. Caleb had claimed that because he was often away on business, the twins might not be his, and therefore he shouldn't have to pay the heir premium detailed in their marriage contract. Amelia looked at Caleb. Her eyes weren't sad anymore. They were cold. "He wants a paternity test?" Amelia asked. "I do," Caleb said, regaining his composure. He straightened his tie. I have reason to believe she was unfaithful. I have been sterile since a procedure in 2021, a procedure I never told her about. Caleb smiled. This was his ace in the hole. He had gotten a secret vasectomy 3 years ago. The twins were 2. The math didn't work. He had been waiting to drop this bomb. So, unless the Holy Spirit visited our bedroom, Your Honor, those kids aren't mine, and if they aren't mine, the prenup is void and she gets nothing. Bianca smirked next to him. Told you, she whispered. Amelia didn't flinch. She didn't look shocked. She just reached into her bag one more time. I knew you would say that, Caleb, she said softly. She pulled out a thick, sealed medical file. This, Amelia said, holding it up, is a letter from Dr. Aris Thorne, the specialist who performed your vasectomy. Caleb's smile faltered. So? That proves my point. Read the second page, Amelia said, handing the file to the bailiff, who walked it up to the judge. Judge Thornton opened the file. He read in silence for a long minute. Then he looked up over his glasses at Caleb. The look on the judge's face was one of pure disbelief. Mr. Montgomery, the judge said slowly, did you go back for the follow-up appointment to confirm the procedure was successful? Caleb blinked. I was busy, but the doctor said it was 99% effective. Well, the judge said, shaking his head. According to this report from Dr. Thorne, which is dated 2 months after your procedure, your wife came in to pick up your results because you were in Tokyo. The procedure failed, Mr. Montgomery. You never had the vasectomy redone. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. What? But that's not the secret, Amelia interrupted. She took a step forward, putting Sophie down. She looked directly at Bianca, then at Caleb. The secret isn't about my children, Caleb, Amelia said, her voice ringing clear in the courtroom. The secret is about the child Bianca says she is carrying right now. Caleb froze. Bianca had told him she was pregnant last week. That was why he was rushing the divorce. He wanted to marry her before she showed. What are you talking about? Caleb whispered. Your Honor, Amelia said, I would like to call a surprise witness, someone who just entered the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned. Walking through the doors was a man. He was tall, muscular, and looked like a fitness instructor. He looked confused and angry. Who is that? Caleb asked. Bianca let out a strangled gasp. She tried to hide behind Caleb. No. That, Amelia pointed, is Marco. He is Bianca's personal trainer, and based on the text messages I recovered from the cloud account you and Bianca share, he is the actual father of the baby she is claiming is yours. Caleb whipped his head around to look at Bianca. The mistress was trembling, her face ghostly white. Is this true? Caleb roared, forgetting he was in a courtroom. Order. The judge banged the gavel, but the drama was just beginning, because the judge was opening a new folder, one that Amelia hadn't provided, but the court investigator had. Mr. Montgomery, sit down, Judge Thornton commanded, because I have one more revelation here, and frankly, it makes the rest of this look like a playground dispute. The judge held up a red file. It seems the SEC has been monitoring your offshore accounts, Mr. Montgomery. Not because of your wife, but because Miss Rossi here, the judge pointed the gavel at the terrified mistress, has been acting as an informant for the feds for the last 6 months in exchange for immunity on her own embezzlement charges. Caleb looked at Bianca. Bianca looked at the floor. You wore a wire? Caleb whispered, horrified. Bianca started crying. I didn't want to go to jail, Caleb. They caught me spending the company card. Amelia stood there, amidst the ruins of her husband's life, and for the first time in years, she smiled. The silence that followed Judge Thornton's revelation was the kind usually reserved for funerals or bomb defusal sites. Caleb Montgomery, a man who had spent his entire adult life curating an image of untouchable power, looked as though he had been struck by lightning. He stared at Bianca, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, struggling to process the magnitude of the betrayal. "You," Caleb choked out, his voice cracking. "You wore a wire? In my house? In my bed?" Bianca was sobbing now, messy, ugly tears that made her mascara run in black rivets down her cheeks. "They had me on credit card fraud, Caleb. They were going to send me to federal prison for 10 years. They said if I gave them the offshore accounts, they'd let me walk." "You gave them the accounts?" Caleb roared, lunging toward her. The bailiff moved with surprising speed, stepping between the two and shoving Caleb back into his chair. "Sit down, now." "She ruined me," Caleb screamed, spitting as he yelled. "I bought you everything. The cars, the clothes, that damn boat. And you sold me out?" "Mr. Montgomery!" Judge Thornton's voice boomed over the chaos, amplified by the microphone. "Another outburst like that, and I will have you gagged. Do you understand me?" Caleb slumped back, breathing heavily, his hands shaking violently. He looked at his lawyer, Arthur Abernathy, but Arthur was already packing his briefcase. "What are you doing?" Caleb hissed. "I'm withdrawing as your counsel," Abernathy said, coldly, not even looking at him. "I represent clients in civil divorce cases, Caleb. I do not represent targets of federal RICO investigations. And I certainly don't represent clients who lie to me about their assets. You're on your own. You can't leave me." "Watch me," Abernathy said, snapping his briefcase shut and walking out the side door without a backward glance. At the plaintiff's table, Amelia hadn't moved. She stood like a statue amidst the hurricane she had unleashed. She reached down and picked up a dropped cracker that Sophie had let fall, placing it in a napkin. It was such a mundane, motherly action in the middle of the destruction that it made the scene even more surreal. "Mrs. Montgomery," the judge said, his tone shifting from fury to gentle respect, "it seems we have a complex situation. The federal authorities are currently waiting outside this courtroom. They allowed this hearing to proceed so that Miss Ross's testimony could be entered into public record, cementing their case." Amelia nodded. "I know, Your Honor. Agent Miller contacted me last week. I've been cooperating." Caleb's head snapped toward his wife. You knew?" "I knew everything, Caleb," Amelia said, finally looking him in the eye. "I knew when you started moving the money. I knew when you changed the passcodes. I knew when you started sleeping with her. And I knew when the FBI approached you 6 months ago and you ignored their subpoena. You thought I was just the quiet wife at home washing your socks. You forgot that I was the one who balanced the books when we started the company in the garage." She took a step closer to the defense table. The bailiff tensed, but Amelia raised a hand to show she was calm. "You called me weak," she said softly. "You told Bianca I was pathetic. But while you were buying yachts and hiding money, I was saving every receipt. I was documenting every phone call. I was building a raft to save my children while you were drilling holes in the ship." Suddenly, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 6 agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI marched in. The lead agent, a stern woman named Agent Carter, walked straight to the defense table. "Caleb Montgomery," she announced, "you are under arrest for securities fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." Caleb stood up, his legs wobbling. He looked at Bianca. "Help me. Tell them I didn't know." Bianca looked away, wiping her nose. "I can't, Caleb. It's part of my deal." "Actually," Agent Carter said, turning to Bianca. "About that deal, Miss Rossi." Bianca froze. "What?" "The immunity agreement was contingent on your full and truthful cooperation," Agent Carter said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her belt. "But perjury in a state court, lying to a judge about your assets and the paternity of a child to defraud a divorce settlement, that violates the terms of your federal agreement." Bianca's eyes bulged. No, you promised." "We promised you immunity for the embezzlement," Carter said, snapping the cuffs onto Bianca's wrists. "We didn't give you a license to commit perjury in Judge Thornton's courtroom. You're coming with us, too." The wail that Bianca let out was ear-splitting. She thrashed, screaming for Marco, the personal trainer, to help her. But Marco was already backing out of the courtroom door, looking like he wanted to be on a different continent. Amelia watched as her husband and his mistress were marched out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Caleb looked back at her one last time. His eyes were filled with fear, begging for a lifeline. Amelia didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just turned her back on him and picked up her daughter. "Mama, go home?" Sophie asked, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Yes, baby," Amelia whispered, kissing the top of her head. "We're going home, and no one is ever going to hurt us again." Judge Thornton cleared his throat. "Mrs. Montgomery, in light of the arrests, I am granting you full, sole, legal and physical custody of the children. I am also granting an emergency order seizing all remaining domestic assets before the feds freeze them to ensure child support is secured. You get the house, the cars, and the liquid cash remaining in the Seattle accounts." "Thank you, Your Honor," Amelia said. "Don't thank me," the judge said, taking off his glasses and rubbing his eyes. "You're the one who did the work. Good luck, Mrs. Montgomery." 3 months had passed since the day Caleb was dragged out of the courtroom. The media frenzy had been relentless. The headlines were sensational. Real estate tycoon and mistress arrested in courtroom shock, and the housewife who toppled an empire. Amelia hated the attention. She turned down interviews with major networks. She refused the book deals. She just wanted peace. But peace was expensive. While the judge had awarded her the assets, the reality was much messier. The FBI had frozen the bulk of the estate. The penthouse was seized as proceeds of crime. The bank accounts were locked in litigation. Amelia had the legal right to the money, but accessing it was a nightmare of red tape. She was living in a small, rented 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb. It was a far cry from the penthouse, but it had a backyard with a swing set, and the twins loved it. However, the shadow of Caleb still loomed. It was a rainy Tuesday when Amelia received a knock on her door. She expected it to be the postman. Instead, it was a man she didn't recognize. He was wearing a cheap suit and had a predatory smile. "Mrs. Montgomery?" he asked. "It's Ms. Vance now," Amelia corrected, using her maiden name. "Can I help you?" "I represent the Obsidian Investment Group," the man said, handing her a card. "Your ex-husband, borrowed a significant sum from our private equity fund 3 months before his arrest. It was a personal loan, co-signed by you." Amelia felt a cold pit in her stomach. "I never signed anything." The man pulled a document from his folder. "That's your signature, isn't it?" Amelia looked. It was a forgery. A good one, but a forgery. Caleb had practiced her signature for years, usually to sign birthday cards for his parents when he couldn't be bothered. "He forged this." "That's a matter for the courts," the man shrugged. "But right now, the debt is $2 million. And since Mr. Montgomery is currently awaiting trial and has no assets, we are looking to you for repayment. We will be placing a lien on this property and garnishing any future wages." Amelia stared at him. She was tired. She had spent months fighting lawyers, fighting the press, fighting the sadness of her children, asking where Daddy was. She didn't have the energy for this. But then she looked past the man, into the living room where Leah was building a tower of blocks. She remembered the look on Caleb's face when he called her weak. "You're not placing a lien on anything," Amelia said, her voice steady. The man chuckled. "Ms. Vance, we have the paperwork." "And I have a forensic handwriting analyst on retainer," Amelia lied smoothly. "I also know that Obsidian Investment Group is a subsidiary of a shell company operating out of Malta, which is currently under investigation by the same task force prosecuting my ex-husband. If you file a lien, I will file a motion to include your firm in the federal discovery process. Do you really want the FBI looking at your books just to chase a bad debt?" The man's smile vanished. He blinked, looking at the tired woman in the oversized sweater who spoke like a seasoned prosecutor. I would have to check with my superiors." "You do that," Amelia said, stepping back to close the door. "And tell them if they ever come to my home again, I won't call the police. I'll call Agent Carter." She slammed the door. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to breathe. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the gatekeeper. Later that afternoon, Amelia sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by ledgers. She realized that she couldn't just wait for the settlement money. It might take years. She needed to work. She looked at the skills she had developed over the last year. Investigating, auditing, finding hidden truths. She pulled out her laptop and opened a new document. She typed a header. Vance Consulting. Forensic Accounting and Asset Recovery. She wasn't going to go back to being a housewife. She was going to help other women find the money their husbands were hiding. 6 months later, the business was booming. It turned out there were a lot of wealthy women in Seattle who suspected their partners were cheating, financially and emotionally. Amelia had a waiting list. She had just finished a meeting with a client in downtown Seattle and decided to treat herself to a coffee at a high-end cafe near the courthouse. As she waited for her latte, she heard a commotion near the entrance. "I'm telling you, I paid for it!" A shrill voice screamed. Amelia froze. She knew that voice. She turned to see Bianca Rossi arguing with a barista. Bianca looked drastically different. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by cheap, flashy synthetic fabrics that didn't fit right. Her hair, once perfectly highlighted, was showing inches of dark roots. She looked haggard, thin, and desperate. "Ma'am, your card was declined," the barista said loudly. "You need to pay or leave." "Do you know who I am?" Bianca screeched, looking around for validation. "I was on the cover of the Post. I'm famous." "You're holding up the line," a customer grumbled. Bianca spun around, her eyes wild. Her gaze landed on Amelia. The cafe went silent. Amelia stood there, holding her latte, looking impeccable in a tailored navy blazer and cream trousers. She looked healthy, strong, and calm. Bianca's jaw dropped. Then her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She lunged toward Amelia. "You!" Bianca screamed. "This is your fault. Look at me. I'm living in a shelter because of you." Amelia didn't flinch. She took a sip of her coffee. "Hello, Bianca. I see Marco didn't stick around once the money ran out." "He stole my jewelry!" Bianca wailed, getting closer, her hands clawed. "You witch! You took everything from Caleb, and now he's rotting in a cell, and I have nothing. You should be paying me. I carried your husband's baby." "We both know that wasn't Caleb's baby," Amelia said coolly. "And from what I heard, you lost the pregnancy due to stress. I am sorry about that, Bianca. Truly. No child deserves to be born into this mess. But don't rewrite history. You didn't lose everything because of me. You lost everything because you bet on a liar. and you happen to be a worse liar than him." Bianca screamed and tried to grab Amelia's hair. Before she could make contact, a large hand clamped onto Bianca's shoulder. It was the security guard, but behind him stood 2 police officers who had just walked in for their coffee break. "That's enough," the officer said, pulling Bianca back. "She assaulted me," Bianca lied, struggling. "She hit me." The officer looked at Amelia, then at the barista. "The lady in the blazer didn't move," the barista said immediately. "This crazy woman attacked her." "Let's go," the officer said, cuffing Bianca. Again. As they dragged her out, Bianca twisted her head back, spitting venom. "It's not over. Caleb gets sentenced next week. He'll tell the truth. He'll destroy you." Amelia watched her go. She felt a pang of pity, but it was fleeting. Bianca had made her choices. Amelia walked out of the cafe, the cool Seattle air hitting her face. Next week was the sentencing, the final chapter. She had to be there. Not for Caleb, but to close the book. The morning of the sentencing, Seattle was drowning in a relentless, grey downpour. It was fitting weather for the funeral of a reputation. Amelia Vance stood at the bottom of the granite steps leading up to the federal courthouse. 6 months ago, she had walked up these stairs trembling, carrying 2 toddlers and a diaper bag, terrified that she wouldn't be able to afford milk for the week. Today, she stood in a tailored black trench coat, her hair swept back in an elegant chignon, holding nothing but a sleek leather clutch. She wasn't trembling. She was vibrating with a strange, cold energy. It wasn't happiness. Victory in a divorce like this rarely felt like happiness. It felt like survival. "Mrs. Montgomery, Mrs. Montgomery, over here." The paparazzi were a wall of flashing lights behind the police barricades. Since the news broke about the wiretap and the diaper bag evidence, Amelia had become a reluctant local celebrity. They called her the Iron Mom. She hated it, but she understood it. People wanted to believe that justice was real. Today, she would find out if they were right. She walked through the metal detectors, the guards nodding to her with respect. "Morning, Miss Vance." "Good morning, Officer Miller." She walked down the long, echoing hallway toward courtroom 4B. The same room where her marriage had officially ended. The same room where she had watched Bianca Rossi get handcuffed. The courtroom was already overflowing. It was standing room only. Former employees of Montgomery Holdings, investors who had lost their pensions, and curious onlookers packed the gallery. The air smelled of wet wool and nervous sweat. Amelia took her seat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table. She sat alone. She didn't need a hand to hold anymore. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. His voice bounced off the mahogany walls, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. Judge Harrison Thornton swept into the room. He looked older than he had 6 months ago. This case had been a marathon of motions, counter-motions, and revelations that had shaken the city's elite. He sat down, adjusting his robes, his face grim. "Bring in the defendant," Thornton ordered. The side door opened. The chains rattled first. It was a heavy metallic sound that made the stomach turn. Caleb Montgomery shuffled in. The collective gasp from the gallery was audible. The man who entered wasn't the titan of industry who had graced the cover of Forbes. He was a ghost. He had lost at least 30 pounds. His once thick dark hair was thinning and grey, shaved close to his scalp. His skin was sallow, the result of months in protective custody without sunlight. The orange jumpsuit hung off his frame like a sack. He kept his head down, refusing to look at the gallery. But as he sat at the defense table, his eyes darted to the side, searching. They locked onto Amelia. For a second, the old Caleb flickered behind his eyes, a spark of arrogance, a silent plea that said, "Fix this for me, Amelia. You always fix it." Amelia held his gaze and didn't blink. She offered him nothing. No pity, no anger, just a mirror reflecting his own ruin. "We are here for the sentencing of Caleb James Montgomery," Judge Thornton said, his voice dry. "Mr. Montgomery has entered a guilty plea to 14 counts of federal wire fraud, 3 counts of tax evasion, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. We have heard the prosecution's recommendation. Does the defense wish to speak?" Caleb's new lawyer was a public defender named Mr. Katz. He looked exhausted. He stood up, buttoning a suit that was slightly too tight. "Your Honor," Katz began, his voice weary. "My client understands the gravity of his actions. He is a man who lost his way. He was under immense pressure to maintain the liquidity of his company during a volatile market. He made terrible choices. But he is also a father to 2 young twins who need him. We ask the court for leniency. We ask for the minimum sentence of 5 years to allow him a chance to rebuild a relationship with his children." At the mention of the children, Caleb squeezed his eyes shut. A single tear tracked through the stubble on his cheek. It was a good performance, but Amelia knew better. Caleb wasn't crying for the children. He was crying for the loss of his control. "The prosecution?" Judge Thornton asked. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Jenkins, stood up. "Your Honor, the defense speaks of a father who lost his way. But the evidence shows a man who meticulously planned to defraud not only his investors but his own family. Mr. Montgomery didn't just make mistakes. He set up shell companies in the names of his mistress. He attempted to falsify paternity tests to disinherit his own toddlers. This wasn't panic. This was predation. The people ask for the maximum sentence." The judge nodded slowly. He looked over his spectacles at the gallery. "I understand the victim. The ex-wife is present?" Amelia stood up. The room went dead silent. You could hear the rain lashing against the high windows. "I am, Your Honor." "Mrs. Vance," the judge said gently, "you submitted a written victim impact statement. Do you wish to read it aloud?" Amelia felt her heart hammer against her ribs. This was it. The moment she had rehearsed in the shower, in the car, in the dark hours of the morning, when the twins wouldn't sleep. "Yes, Your Honor." She walked to the podium. It felt like walking to a gallows, but she wasn't the one with the rope around her neck. She placed her hands on the wood to steady them. She looked at the judge, then turned her body slightly to face Caleb. He looked up at her, his lip trembling. "Caleb," she started. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear as a bell. "You spent 10 years telling me I was nothing. You told me I was boring, because I liked to save money. You told me I was ungrateful, because I didn't like your flashy parties. You made me feel small so that you could feel big." She took a breath. "When I walked into this courtroom 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I had $18 in my checking account. I had 2 babies who needed me. And I had a husband who was trying to erase us to make room for a boat and a new girlfriend." Caleb flinched as if she had slapped him. "You underestimated me, Caleb," Amelia continued, her voice gaining strength, filling the room. "You thought that because I was kind, I was weak. You thought that because I was a mother, I was distracted. But you forgot something important. You forgot that I was the one who proofread your contracts when you started. I was the one who managed the books. I knew where the bodies were buried because I was the one holding the shovel while you dug the holes." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. "I don't hate you," Amelia said, and the sadness in her voice was genuine. "Hating you would require energy that I need for my children. I pity you." You had everything. You had a family who adored you. You had wealth. You had health. And you threw it all into a shredder because it wasn't enough. It was never enough. She leaned forward, gripping the podium. Mr. Katz asked for leniency, so you can be a father, she said, looking at the defense lawyer, then back to Caleb. But you aren't a father, Caleb. A father protects. A father provides. A father doesn't try to prove his children are bastards to save a few percentage points on a prenup. You are just a donor. And my children, Leo and Sophie, they will know who you are. Not because I will poison them against you, but because I will tell them the truth, and the truth is enough to condemn you. She stepped back. I ask the court for justice, not for me, but for the too little financial inconveniences waiting for me at home. She sat down. Caleb had his head in his hands. His shoulders were shaking violently. Whether it was shame or terror, no one could tell. Judge Thornton let the silence hang in the air for a long, uncomfortable minute. He picked up a sheaf of papers, stacked them neatly, and then folded his hands. Caleb Montgomery, please rise. Caleb stood up. The shackles clanked again. He looked small. In my 30 years on the bench, Judge Thornton began, his voice low and dangerous, I have seen murderers, gangs, and drug dealers, but I have rarely seen a white-collar criminal display such a profound lack of moral character as you have. The judge leaned forward. You didn't just steal money. You stole trust. You utilized the court system as a weapon against your spouse. You corrupted a young woman, Miss Rossi, into committing felonies for you, and you attempted to weaponize DNA science to abandon your offspring. It is cold. It is calculated. It is sociopathic. Caleb opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Mr. Katz asked for 5 years, the judge continued. But frankly, Mr. Montgomery, I don't think 5 years is enough time for you to understand the definition of the word consequence. The judge picked up his gavel. On the 14 counts of fraud, I sentence you to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Caleb's knees buckled. Mr. Katz had to grab his elbow to keep him upright. On the counts of tax evasion and conspiracy, the judge went on, relentless, I sentence you to an additional 5 years to be served consecutively. 20 years? Caleb gasped, the air leaving his lungs. Your Honor, please. That's my whole life. You should have thought about that before you bought the yacht, Mr. Montgomery, Thornton said coldly. Furthermore, I am ordering full restitution of $12 million. The court is seizing all remaining assets held by Montgomery Holdings. The penthouse, the vehicles, the art collection, it is all gone. It will be liquidated to pay back your investors and the legal fees of your wife. No, Caleb moaned. No, please. We are adjourned. The judge slammed the gavel down. The sound triggered chaos. The gallery erupted in chatter. Reporters were already running for the doors to file their stories. 2 marshals moved in on Caleb. They grabbed him by the arms. Amelia! Caleb screamed, twisting his body around as they dragged him back. Amelia, don't let them take me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about Bianca. I'll sign whatever you want. Just help me. The desperation in his voice was primal. It was the sound of a drowning man. Amelia stood up slowly. She gathered her coat. She watched as her husband, the man she had vowed to love until death, was hauled toward the holding cell door. He locked eyes with her one last time before he was shoved through the doorway. He looked at her with wide, terrified eyes, realizing finally, fatally, that she wasn't coming to save him. The door slammed shut. The heavy metallic clank of the lock engaging echoed through the room. It was over. Amelia let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for a year. Her legs felt a little weak, but she didn't sit down. "Mrs. Vance." She turned. It was Agent Carter from the FBI. The woman looked softer today, less like a machine. "That was quite a statement," Carter said. "You held it together better than I would have." "I had to," Amelia said quietly. Is Bianca okay?" Carter sighed. "She's in a minimum security facility. She took a plea deal last week. 3 years. She's pregnant again, you know. Marco's baby. She'll have the child in the system." Amelia felt a pang of genuine sorrow. "I hope she learns," Amelia said, "for the baby's sake." "You're a better woman than me," Carter said, extending a hand. "Good luck, Amelia. If you ever want a job in forensic accounting, give me a call. You have a knack for following the money." Amelia shook the hand, a small smile touching her lips. "I might just take you up on that." She turned and walked up the aisle. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She didn't look at the floor anymore. She looked straight ahead. When she pushed open the heavy oak doors of the courthouse, the rain had stopped. It wasn't sunny. It was still Seattle after all. But the clouds were breaking. A shaft of pale light was hitting the wet pavement, making the street look like it was paved with silver. The press was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. As soon as she emerged, the shouting started. "Mrs. Montgomery, is it true he got 20 years? How do you feel about the restitution? What do you say to women who are in your position?" Amelia stopped on the top step. She looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere in that city, in a small daycare center, Leo was probably napping, and Sophie was probably trying to steal his crackers. They were safe. They were free. She looked down at the microphones thrust in her direction. "My name is Amelia Vance," she corrected the reporter who called her Montgomery. "And my message is simple," she said, her voice carrying over the traffic. "If you think you are weak, look at your children. If you think you are trapped, look at the truth. And if you think you can't fight back..." She allowed herself a small, sharp smile. "Hire a good accountant." She walked down the stairs, past the cameras, past the noise, and signaled for a cab. She didn't look back at the courthouse. She didn't look back at the prison van pulling away from the side entrance. She got into the taxi and closed the door, sealing out the noise of the world. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, eyeing her in the rearview mirror. Amelia leaned back, closing her eyes. For the first time in a decade, the silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. "Home," she said. "Take me home." Amelia's story proves that the quietest people often hold the most power. Caleb and Bianca thought they could crush her because she was kind, mistaking her silence for weakness. They learned the hard way that a mother protecting her children is the most dangerous force on earth. While Caleb rots in a cell and Bianca battles her own demons, Amelia built a new life, not on a foundation of lies, but on the strength she found when her back was against the wall. Karma doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it walks into a courtroom carrying 2 toddlers and a diaper bag full of evidence. If this story satisfied your craving for justice, make sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story where the underdog takes the crown. Share this video if you believe cheaters never truly win.